Some brands offer you low finance, or cashback, or servicing.
Renault don't do ors. We do ands. The Renault Kadjar with 1.91% APR and €1,000 cashback and 3 years servicing, saving you thousands. Renault, the brand with the ands. Visit your local Renault dealer. Finance is made under a hire purchase agreement. Terms and conditions apply. Deposit required. Subject to lending criteria. See Renault.ie.
No risk it, no biscuit.
Arizona Cardinals fans, do you see red? Are you part of the Red Sea? Then you are listening to the show for you. A podcast for Cardinals fans, by Cardinals fans, with outsider and insider perspectives. It's time to rise up and see red. Hello, Arizona Cardinals fans, and welcome to the latest edition of the Rise Up See Red podcast. I'm your host, Jess Root, from CardsWire.com, the USA Today NFL Wire site covering the Arizona Cardinals. It's the site I run. My co-host, Seth Cox, as always, is on the line with me. He runs RevengeOfTheBirds.com, SB Nation's NFL site covering the Arizona Cardinals, and also the host of the NFL Draft Breakdown podcast. Seth, you just finished recording a show with college football's back this week.
Yeah.
That doesn't seem real.
Right. We were talking about it. I didn't even know. In July, we looked at the calendar and we're like, all right, we've got all of August. We'll do 5 shows and do the group of 5, the non, big show with the Big 12. And then I went to go look at, who plays first. And I was like, what is this 8/26 listing of games? And then I thought I was in the wrong year and got all confused. And then I was like, oh my gosh, college football starts a week early this year. So it threw off our scheduling. So we ended up having to kind of cram in the Big 12 and Pac-12 and then the ACC and the non-Power 5 conference. But you know what? It's okay. It's all right. It's over. Well, it'll be over on Thursday. They'll be done with. And we got through, about 70 prospects to know heading into the season. And, as the season goes along, we'll grow that list. But there's going to be a lot of good prospects this year. I'm just not sure any of them are going to be a quarterback. So we'll get to have that discussion again come February to April next year for the Arizona Cardinals.
Well, and of course, when they say that there's a good quarterback class, you never actually know that, because every year they say, oh, this is a great quarterback class. And then it's, We're not here to talk college football. If you want that, go ahead and definitely find the NFL Draft Breakdown podcast that Seth and your brother. That's with Justin, right? Justin was co-hosting with you today.
Yeah, Justin Higdon.
But we're here to talk Arizona Cardinals football, as the Cardinals have almost wrapped up training camp. Okay, and by the time you guys listen to this show, you will be either the day before or the day on the last day of practice, or maybe even beyond. But the Cardinals are wrapping up training camp, and they are going to play in their 4th preseason game against the Atlanta Falcons. We've got a lot to cover in this show. The Cardinals lose a preseason down to the wire fun game to the Chicago Bears 24-23. So we're going to look back at that game, the good, the positive, the negative, who helped themselves, who hurt themselves. And we've also got quite a bit of news that came out just in the last couple of days we'll discuss, and then look ahead to the game this weekend against the Atlanta Falcons, where the Cardinals are done at home in the preseason. They're not going to be back at University of Phoenix Stadium until the Monday night game against Dallas on September 25th. So we got more than a month before we see them again on our home stadium here. So let's go ahead and get started. We're going to talk about the game on Saturday, 24-23 loss. What did you take away first and foremost in terms of the good?
I think the good was, one, we saw Palmer take a licking and keep on ticking. I mean, I kind of wrote about it, and it's not something you want to see in preseason, especially with your entire first team offensive line out there. but he got up and he made throws. And this is something that we've kind of known about Palmer, that he can get a little skittish as he takes those hits. But he really stood in there and made some throws. I thought that was brilliant of him. I thought the young defensive linemen again were aggressive and violent, and they clearly are the superior athletic beings, Robert Kimdiche and Olsen Pierre, to the starters in Frosty Rucker and Josh Morrow. Rucker didn't play bad, but I thought if you were to ask me to list the rankings of who played well, I would say Pierre was the best. Kimdiche was, number 2, and then Rucker was number 3. So I think the continued growth of that second defensive line unit is important, because we've talked about this. Rucker and Morrow are guys that you want playing 30 to 40% of the snaps, not guys you want taking 60 to 70% of the snaps. So and Pierre kind of step up was important. And I think the last takeaway for me, and something that you can hang your hat on the last 2 weeks, was Brandon Williams. And especially this week, I don't know if it was just because Trubisky is still kind of learning to win from the pocket and other things, but man, he located the ball twice. He drew an offensive pass interference that should have been an interception. Then he should have had another interception. So this was by far the best play we've seen from Brandon Williams in a Cardinals uniform. Granted, it was against third and fourth team wide receivers, but that wasn't happening previously. So we can take that growth as a positive. And I think the biggest thing was clearly that he was able to make plays on the ball. He didn't make any plays on the ball, but he was able to make plays on the ball, if that makes sense.
Yeah, and for me, it didn't look like Brandon Williams out there, because we've talked about this before. Brandon Williams out there at cornerback looked like a guy who just like a super athletic guy who was just playing another position. It never looked natural. And I don't know what happened in the last 2 weeks, because we saw the roller coaster last year. I mean, he's got the talent. Steve Keim talks about. He checks off all the boxes in terms of physical attributes, mental attributes, the competitiveness, everything, the movement, the hips, everything, except for the experience. But that game against the Bears, he not only looked like a corner, and this is the first time I think he looks like a cornerback, because the other times he looks like a guy who's trying to play cornerback. He looked like a guy who knew how to play. And not only that, he looked like a good cornerback out there. Now, granted, it wasn't against starters, but at the same time, that was real progress. And if he's turned a corner, then great. Maybe Steve Keim's not crazy after all. Maybe this pick wasn't a reach ultimately, and that he's going to develop into something special. Special enough that a starter in the league gets. But yeah, it was very, very encouraging to see him not only be run around out there and hip to hip against another receiver, but to look like a guy who knew what he was doing out there. I was really encouraged by that.
And
for me,
I think the other thing is with that, and you kind of hit on it, and I don't want to take it as far, because it's slightly different in that Hassan Reddick has at least played on the defensive side of the ball in college. But I think you're seeing some similarities with the growth or the stagnation, if you will, of Reddick, the inside linebacker, as that you saw with Brandon Williams. We all got really excited about Brandon Williams last year in camp, especially at the beginning, where it seemed almost on a daily basis we were getting tweets sent out. Bruce Arians was just praising every little thing he did, and he's going to be competing this year, and blah blah blah. And And then you saw that with Reddick. And then you got to the flash of Reddick, but then you kind of, like, fundamental things weren't there. And it was the same thing with Brandon Williams last year. Fundamental things weren't there. And then you remembered this guy, Brandon Williams, played 500 college snaps, real time snaps, not practice, not, in the training room, not anything else. 500 real snaps in college at cornerback. He wasn't ready. Like, he wasn't ready. And now you see that growth. And like you said, you see technique and fundamentals coming to fruition. And you carry that over, at least for me, you carry that over and you look at Hassan Reddick and you say, he's already got the flashes. He's already got more flash than Brandon Williams had. But you can see that he's still thinking too much. He's not reacting as an inside linebacker. But if you can kind of project the same type of growth, you have to be excited, because you're talking about two athletic freaks of nature learning how to play positions that they've never played before, and kind of their growth curve. And as you said, Williams stepping into that is just so great.
And what it does is, the worries that you had for the cornerback position suddenly disappear, because now we know what the top four is going to look like. You got Patrick Peterson, you got Justin Bethel, you got Brandon Williams, and you got Tramon Williams. I mean, Justin Bethel has been solid. He's on pace to be the starter. Tramon Williams, even at his age, you know what you're going to get. You're going to get solid play. He may not be great, but if Brandon Williams also can be serviceable out there and not a disaster like sometimes he was, then you've got four capable cornerbacks, and suddenly the position where you're like, wait, who? And you were thinking about Ronald Zamort being aside from the sadness that he's a young player who's trying to make a roster and he's done for the season, and we're not worrying about, okay, can Eli Buka is it Ronald Zamort, Sojourn Schultz, a bunch of guys who never played anything. Now you have real talent back there, which is, if Justin Bethel gets hurt for a game or two, you don't feel like they're taking that much of a step back on the defense.
No, and that's kind of, and I've kind of, my biggest concern this year, outside of, could they develop a second corner, opposite Patrick Peterson, was, if they do develop Justin Bethel, are they going to lose him again? Even if he was on par with a Marcus Cooper type, Pro Bowl alternate Marcus Cooper, do you want to lose him or that player again? Because you're probably, I know that they could have a bunch of money freeing up, and God forbid both Fitz and Palmer leave, and you're gonna have to pay somebody, and so maybe you do pay Bethel, but then also you've kind of wasted a third round pick, if we're being completely honest. At that point you're saying, well, Justin Bethel, a player that we have developed, we're gonna pay him 4 years, $25 million, and we're gonna let Brandon Williams play out the string here and then move on. So I think that speaks well to 2018, where now all of a sudden you're able to plug in Brandon Williams. You'll still bring in a vet. You'll maybe even bring back a Tramon Williams if he's on this roster for the full year, and you bring back a Tramon Williams as your main backup guy. But then you have 2 years of Brandon Williams, and then all of a sudden you're able to make some more fundamental decisions in terms of roster building, instead of having to reinvest it big money in a second corner.
Another thing for me that was a good takeaway was, there was a worry early, because neither the defense nor the offense initially played well. However, they flipped the switch, and the things that we both talked about wanting to see from the starters, we saw Tyrann Mathieu make a play on the ball, picks off a pass. He looked like Honey Badger. He'd been picking off passes left and right in practice. Now let's see it in a game. He showed in a game. So this is the progress they're making. So not only did he make a play, which gives you the optimism that he's going to be an impact player this year, because let's be honest, last year he not only was not an impact player, he was a liability at times out there, and it looks like he's turned that around. 1, 2, we saw the starters making plays, and after Matthew made the play, then the offense then turned around and put points on the board, and not just points, but scored a touchdown. They got big third down plays. Carson Palmer held the ball too long, as Varian said, but Palmer says he likes to get those hits out of the way. Because it feels good to get hit and knocked around a little bit in the preseason, because as a quarterback, you don't get touched. And so you kind of get hit once or twice, you realize, oh, okay, yes, this is football, and you've got to get used to being sore again. So the fact that, now granted, there's some of those concerns that we had in the season last year where they start slowly every single game, and it happened the same thing in the preseason last year, but they flipped a switch. So they started sluggishly, but they turned it around, which is exactly what you have to do, because you're not going to be a juggernaut at the start of every game, and things aren't going to go right. Michael Floyd's going to drop a third down pass, and you have to work through that. Not this year. There won't be any Michael Floyd drop third down passes, but some sort of adversity early on, instead of it letting it derail them, they then made a play and turned it into touchdown. So that was, at least early on, it was a great thing to see.
Yeah, and going back real quick to Badger, that was what you've been waiting for from him. And I think a lot of it was, obviously didn't play in the Dallas game. I think he had 11 snaps, something like that, in the Oakland game. I mean, there wasn't a chance for him to kind of get into a rhythm and make plays, and then to see him in his first extended look of the preseason, and not facing the Cardinals quarterbacks, and we've talked about this a bunch, but most of the time the defensive backs know the routes, they're jumping routes, they're cheating, or they're playing against Trevor Knight, and they're just able to pick off a lot of passes. So it's just one of those things that when you see it in the game, and yes, Mike Glennon is probably the worst starting quarterback in the NFL, but it still was against.
No, come on. He's the future starting quarterback of the Cardinals, right?
Oh, man. Did you see that throw he made into triple coverage off his back foot? Like, there wasn't a soul that could have made that play, and yet he threw it. It's
ballsy. It's ballsy. Yeah, exactly. And you want that in your quarterback.
Right. And for a big guy, he sure doesn't throw the ball very hard. But anyways, this isn't about Mike Glennon. But yeah, it was just great to see Badger back and kind of, like you said, shaking off the rust. And then I don't know about you, and you were at the game, weren't you?
Yes.
So was the reaction in the press box, I assume, fall down? Just go down. Stop running. Yes. Stop running. Like, that's what we're
like. Why are you moving around? Why are you moving around? Oh crap! You're going to get hurt. Oh crap! There's the ball pops out.
Right. Well, at that point, I was like, just let it go. Just let somebody else fall on it. Like, here, and you can't do that because he has to be.
He has to be that
kind of. Right. He has to be that reckless guy. And I know fans don't want to hear this, but that's who he is. He is a reckless, but he's controlled when he's reckless. Like he does things other players can't do. And it's an instinctual thing. No matter what Madden 18 says, he has the best football instincts in the NFL. It's just a matter of health at this point. And we've talked about Bob Sanders and Tyrann Mathieu quite a bit. That is the comp. That's the career arc. Is this the year we get the Tyrann Mathieu Defensive Player of the Year? Got from Bob Sanders one year. So is this the year that we get a full, 16 regular season games? And by the way, the Indianapolis Colts won the Super Bowl that year, if I remember right. So is that what we get this year from Tyrann Mathieu? Is that who he can be this year? To really kind of push the Cardinals back over the top, especially defensively, where we talked about it last week, but they missed that spark that those plays provided. And let's remember, he intercepted that pass and then they went down and scored. The offense to that point had looked atrocious. And so he sparked the only scoring drive for the starters. And it was, in my opinion, an important one because, as you talked about, allowed Palmer to get back in a rhythm, to kind of find his footing, to get hit some more, and still to make some throws.
Any other particular performances from individual players that stood out? For me, I liked the fact, I mean, we're going to continue with even though we're going to talk about this later, that Blaine Gabbert is not competing for a backup job. But as we continue with the summer of Blaine Gabbert, because that's kind of what it is, the summer of Blaine Gabbert it was great to see him once again. And I noticed that, why he started getting in rhythm early. He came into the game in the second half and he played well. He was playing behind that second team line that Stanton was, and just like he did against Dallas when he looked really, really good. But even with the third team line in there, then he made plays late. When Chicago scored, and it was the 10-point deficit, I remember posting on the live blog I was doing, this game pretty much is put away, barring some, magic. And the Cardinals got some magic. Blaine Gabbert had they had the big plays. He got the field goal. They got the onside kick. He drives them down. If remember 2015, it was the sort of thing that Carson Palmer did and the offense did down the stretch. When they were making plays late, they knew where they were going to do it. They got the ball. They moved the ball. They put themselves in position. And thank goodness they didn't get the extra point to go for the tie. And ultimately, as a preseason game, you didn't get the 2-point conversion, and they still lose. But there was enough there where you're like, okay. Now, granted, and I've tempered this before, Blaine Gabbert is a 7-year pro, has 40 starts under his belt. No, he hasn't been the greatest, one of the worst quarterbacks ever, but he is a top talent in terms of quarterback and arm talent, and he's got lots of experience. He should look like the best player on the field. And he was, which is exactly what you want to see. So it was just more positives thrown in his direction, kind of stocking up those points, because we're not going to see him again once the regular season starts. He's going to be he's going to be inactive almost every single game day. And we're not going to hear from him again until next offseason, if they bring him back, assuming that they do. And so this is a great opportunity to kind of stock up a whole bunch of positive juju, so that when it is the great quarterback battle of Drew Stanton and Blaine Gabbert in 2018, the fans are already leaning towards one player.
Yeah, and it was clear that that's who they wanted, and that's what they'd want out of it. I thought the thing that impressed me the most, and I've got real concerns with Gabbert in the fact that when he needs to put something on the ball, when he needs to get the ball pushed down the field, it's done with a very elongated windup, and so I wonder if those windows are going to close a little quicker with the guys that are going to actually be on NFL rosters, as opposed to guys that will be selling insurance in a couple weeks. But I thought the biggest thing was he got absolutely murdered for about the first 2 series, if I remember all my information correctly. I think, and he got sacked 4 times. And I would say all 4, but 3 of those sacks were clearly just being terrible, which is another conversation for another show or later in the show. But he did something that Blaine Gabbert hasn't done maybe in his career, but definitely hasn't done consistently in his career, and that's respond with and effective plays down the field. And, it brought the Cardinals to within a 2-point conversion of winning. The real story,
and the play was there. The play was there. He should have completed it.
Right, and the real story on the 2-point conversion, I'm sure we'll never get, whether it was actually Blaine's fault. It was, or not. But like you said, he did everything up until that point that you want to see. And then that Blaine Gabbert play came out, and you're like, oh yeah, I forgot it's Blaine Gabbert. But I think the biggest thing is, and I've tweeted this out, I've written this a couple times, a couple days. If you look at Blaine Gabbert through the lens of a late day 2, early day 3 pick from 2016, hell, even 2017, you're really excited about what you see. If you look at Blaine Gabbert from the lens of a 7th-year veteran in the NFL, the mistakes, the throw to Jeremy Ross, those things, you see why he is on his 3rd team and kind of playing for his football playing life at this point. And I think because of the situations he's been in Jacksonville with, maybe one good coordinator and Dirk Cutter, and realistically no good head coaches. And then obviously in San Francisco, and he had a little bit of sustained success over, I think it was 6 or 7 games. I can never remember the correct amount. In 2015, then he beat out Colin Kaepernick for the starting position, and then he stumbled. And that's the other thing I wonder is when when he begins to have expectations, is that when the problems are going to reoccur? Because when he was in San Francisco and he had that stellar 6-7 game stretch, there were no expectations. The expectation was he's not going to be here next year. Somebody's, we're going to release him. Somebody else, he's going to be somebody else's problem. I mean, hell, Jim Tomsula was the coach. Like, nobody cared about the 49ers that year. Like, it was just a year to throw away. And he played well enough that he got the opportunity from Chip Kelly to come back and compete. And then he won. And then you wonder if the expectations of, we've seen, bad quarterbacks have success in Chip Kelly's offense. Why aren't you having success? And then it kind of snowballed, and then everything else happened, and so that's the only, and that's not anything we'll find out until next year when he's competing with Drew Stanton and Blake Bortles for the Cardinals starting quarterback position in 2018.
Yeah, I see what you did there. We're going to collect all the Jaguars quarterbacks. That's what we're going to do. We got Byron Leftwich as a coach. We got Blaine Gabbert. We're going to bring in Blake Bortles. Heck. Yeah, let's bring all the Jaguars.
Well, and you know what?
David Garrard? Can we bring in David Garrard?
Right. And I think I really wonder if Leftwich is the guy they're grooming to be head coach, because some of the comments BA has made have been really intriguing.
Yes, that's a discussion for I think it's another show. Were there any other positives, any other individual performances? I think you liked what you saw. You mentioned Robert Condici, Olsen Pierre. You like what you saw from Jeremy Ross. Personal, he's a guy who's fighting. He's steady enough, but is it going to be enough for the roster? I don't know. A guy that I'd like to see on the roster, but if you look at who else is already kind of locks, is he's going to be a better receiver. This is kind of like the Kerwin Williams situation in a couple of years ago. Jeremy Ross is a better receiver than Britton Golden, but can Jeremy Ross do as many things as Britton Golden? Maybe he can, but Britton Golden's really good on special teams, and he makes plays. So who do you want as your number 6 receiver? Do you want a better receiver? Okay, a guy who's going to play offense better, or do you want a guy who can contribute on special teams more? I like what Ross did. I just don't know if it's going to be enough. And then, obviously, what you liked seeing was, well, you liked seeing Phil Dawson come into the field for a 52-yarder in the last couple of minutes and not worry. I mean, there was no, he's going to kick this. He's going to make. And then I realized it was a 52-yarder. I was like, because, yeah. Remember every time Chet and Kinsara got on the field last year, like, oh boy, you don't feel that with Phil Dawson. so nice. And it's, when he missed the 63-yarder, you're like, ha, 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 what are they doing? You think that's preseason, and then you're like, oh, stupid. But any other individual performances that fall on the positive side for you?
I thought Hubert played well. Again, are either Hubert or Ross going to overtake Britton Golden? I really don't. I mean, that, and again, we're talking about the sixth receiver at this point too. I mean, they may be fifth receiver on game days when John Brown is hurt or when Chad Williams is not playing, but we're still talking about the sixth receiver and name on this roster. I'm trying to go through my mind here. John Wetzel and Ulrich John continue to ball out. Cole Toner looked good again. That second offensive line has played really well, which is something. I don't know what it is though.
It gives you optimism for when Mike Upati's hurt, which he already is, and for 2018. Honestly, because that's something that you want to look forward to that way. Well, coming up next on Rise of Favorite, we're going to talk about the not so pretty things, the things that are concerns, the players who kind of set themselves back a little bit for the roster. That's coming up next on the next segment of Rise Up C-Red.
Some brands offer you low finance, or cashback, or servicing.
Renault don't do ors. We do ands. The Renault Kadjar with 1.91% APR and €1,000 cashback and 3 years servicing, saving you thousands. Renault, the brand with the ands. Visit your local Renault dealer. Finance is made under a hire purchase agreement. Terms and conditions apply. Deposit required subject to lending criteria. See Renault.ie.
We're back on Rise Up C-Red. We've talked about some of the positives already, the things that we were impressed with. Now, let's go to kind of the ugly side. Obviously, if you had number one, remember all those problems with special teams. They all showed up one more time on Saturday, right before halftime, when they drive the ball down the field. They couldn't quite get into good field goal range. So they bring out Phil Dawson. And I know it was just to try it out. Just why not? Can he make it? He missed it. It wasn't even close. Deontay Thompson was like inches from the end line, and he scored a touchdown. It was 109 yards and 2.5 feet. Just insane. Aaron Brewer goes down, misses the tackle. Everyone else on the field seems to forget that. I don't know. It was just one of those stupid special teams plays that just kind of reared its ugly head. And that's not a play that's going to happen during the season. They're not going to go for a 63-yarder, and that's just not going to happen, especially in that situation.
I was going to say maybe they would have if they made it, but now they know they're not.
and you're like, definitely no.
Right, exactly. And now it's like, oh, well, he doesn't have the leg, and not that he doesn't have a great leg, but 63 yards is NFL record type stuff. So okay, so he was what, probably 5 to 7 yards short on that. So he's probably in the 56 range, maybe 58 is going to be pushing it. But now now you're comfortable with where you're, obviously in a late game situation or, with seconds left, you'll kick a 60, 62, 63 yard field goal. But, just before the half, okay, we really need to get to 56 yards if we want to give, Phil the best chance. I wasn't overly upset with special teams in the fact that a lot of the linebackers that'll be playing specials are playing multiple ways, or they're not playing right now because they're injured. The other thing, and I thought the biggest disappointment for me to take away, was that your offensive line was getting zero push in the run game. And the Bears didn't even have their best. Were hitting Carson Palmer quite a bit, and Pernell McPhee wasn't playing. Leonard Floyd's not a bad player. The other kid, and his name's escaping me right now, is not a bad kid either. but I thought that was the most disheartening portion of the game. And this isn't a shot at Blaine Gabbert, but you can live with Blaine Gabbert running the third team with, Will Holden, Dorian Johnson, and Tony Bergstrom, and guys that probably aren't going to be on this roster in 2 weeks getting lit up. You're not going to want to see that from DJ Humphries, Mikey Potty, AQ Shipley, Evan Boehm, and Jared Valdir. And I thought both bookends showed that they're still learning the position.
Yeah, and, Bruce Arians was quick to say that all he could tell from the sideline was Carson holding on to the ball too long, which maybe, but the fact is that there was a play in particular I remember seeing both Humphries and Valdir got beat on the edge, and you're like, that's not good. You made the comment on Twitter, didn't you, that Potty looks washed up?
Yeah, he just doesn't look like he has the consistent power that he used to. He's always moved well, especially laterally and in the run game. His strength's never been as a pass protector, but he's always gotten by. But he's been a mauler. He's been a guy that, really pushes the pile in the run game, and he just doesn't look like he has that explosiveness anymore. So
for me, another thing that, well, obviously the negative that players has to kind of set themselves back was, without Carlos Dansby out there, when you've got Scooby Wright and Hassan Reddick out there playing inside linebacker, it wasn't pretty. And there were reasons for that. Reddick is new to the position, so he has no instincts there. And with Carlos Dansby, he says, okay, you do this. That makes it easy. Scooby couldn't do that. One, he's not good. And two, he wasn't even playing his regular position. He normally plays Reddick's position when he was on the field. But nonetheless, time to pump the brakes on the, Scooby Wright being your starting inside linebacker. He's a depth guy. He's a guy you'd love to have the back of the roster. He's going to play well in special teams. He can come in a pinch in base formations and get in there and get his face dirty and put a face mask on somebody. He's going to make plays and he's going to be intense. But you see why they needed Carlos Dansby, and you see why Dalen Buchanan is going to jump right back into the starting lineup when he's back, because that pick for Reddick, at least for inside linebacker, that wasn't meant for this year. That was meant for in a year or two from now, and he'll end up playing more pass rusher, supreme, flexible, whatever position. They're going to have to make up a position for him. It's what they're going to have to call it. But it was a negative in that sense. You saw some things from Reddick, but more than anything, you're like, no, Scooby Wright, you can't be a starting linebacker in the NFL.
No, and that's the thing, is like, you're working through Reddick's growing pains. With Scooby, he doesn't have the athleticism to win outside of the box. Inside the box, I don't think he's a bad player. But you saw on that crossing pattern where the tight end dragged across that he was just
nowhere.
He was completely
nowhere.
Lost. And you saw any edge runs. He's one of the last guys there. And again, you're just talking about athleticism. Like, their instincts are fine. You have to be able to your instincts are good, but your body has to be able to get you to where your instincts are telling you to go. And sometimes that's just not there, whereas you can see the difference if you watch them play next to each other. And we've seen it plenty. But if you watch them play, there'll be times when Wright is the guy and it's play side on him, and he'll read the play correctly. Hassan Reddick doesn't, and Reddick is still there at the same time. And that's just athleticism. It's not a knock on Scooby. He's a good player. He's going to be on this roster probably for years to come as a special teamer and as kind of a fill-in linebacker. But you just if he's your starting inside linebacker right now, I think you're in trouble.
And it showed, just because he didn't get the guys set up. But yeah, other than that, there wasn't a lot for me there weren't a lot of negatives. Obviously, well, the running game was terrible early. It just really didn't feel like you got anything from the running game at all. And in all except for the spurt there after the interception and with Blaine Gabbert in the game, you get the feeling that it just felt like the starters didn't really want to be out there. They were ready for they're ready for football for real. And after what we saw last year, you're just like, you have to, like coaches like to say, trust the process. You got to trust the process, and you got to focus on every day. All those cliches that every athlete says, I'm just focused on getting better every day, and I'm gonna grind and hit but they got to do that because that sort of lackluster effort carried over into the regular season.
Yeah, and that's the thing is, you would have liked to have seen just a touch more, because that was a concern last year where. I should have looked it up to make sure, but I think it was game like 7 or 8 before they scored points in the first quarter. And it's just, you don't want this to fester like it did last year. And we saw it this week for the first time. Obviously, the starters have only played, I think, 4 total series at this point. Maybe a quarter's worth of plays, maybe a quarter and a half worth of plays. And they scored 2 touchdowns. So are we really going to complain that much? Maybe not. But again, this was the first time they were going against first-team defense, and almost an entire first-team defense from the opposition. The Bears aren't world beaters on defense, and they
looked good. That's the thing.
Exactly.
They looked like they were a good defense for a portion of that time.
Right, exactly. And like you said, I think the run game and then the edge protection is to me, that's the only 2 things you take away from this as the negative, because Carlos Dansby and Daniel Buchanan are your guys at inside linebacker. You might get Hassan Reddick. I'm assuming you're going to get more Josh Bynes at this point than Reddick game 1. And then probably game 2 and definitely game 3 and beyond, unless there's some kind of, physical setback from Buchanan. You're going to see, probably a 75% Dansby with a 90 to 95% Buchanan, and then Bynes and Reddick sprinkled in there to kind of fill in. But I mean, outside of that, you just take away that you're hopeful this is just growing pains for Humphreys and Valdir.
Well, we'll wrap up the negative talk right now. And when we come back on Rise Up Seaward, we're going to talk about some of the issues. That's kind of some of the news that's come out in the last couple of days. So that's coming up next on Rise Up Sea Red. We're back on Rise Up Sea Red, and so we've moved from the game itself. There's a few things that we want to talk about. Let's make the first one very clear. Drew Stanton is and will be the backup quarterback for 2017. But that's not a surprise for us. Neither one of us believed Blaine Gabbert was actually competing for the number 2 job. And sort of the reaction from the Red Sea out there seems to be an interesting one. I haven't heard much, but I heard the news when Bruce Arians said it on the radio. And you and I both have been saying this for the whole entire time. Blaine Gabbert said the Cardinals were never, ever, 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 ever going to go with Blaine Gabbert as their backup for a couple of reasons. One, they still think they have a championship run in them. They think they're a competing team. And they know that Carson Palmer can get hurt. They know with Drew Stanton they can win games. They don't know what they have in Blaine Gabbert. And to play Blaine Gabbert as your backup in an emergency situation could not only ruin this year, it could ruin 2018 because, as I've mentioned, everything that the team, Harold Goodwin, Michael Bidwell, they're talking about Blaine Gabbert as perhaps a part of the future. You don't go with the 9-31 guy as your backup to it when you have a proven, capable backup winner. And, if he plays poorly again, it ruins his career. It ruins the Cardinal seasons, and then they're back at square one for quarterback for next year. So to me, this was a non-starter. Drew Stanton was always going to be the backup. And the only time Bruce Arians even gave an inkling of it is when one time at the beginning of camp, he said, well, that's what Gabbert's here for. He's here to compete. But even Arians said back in the offseason, there really was no way that Gabbert was going to surpass Stanton. And especially a guy in Gabbert who keeps having new offensive systems every year. And the comment they say, well, you need to give him stability. Of course he's going to be here more than 1 year, and he wasn't going to be the backup.
Right, exactly. And that's, that's kind of been the battle cry. Sorry, all this podcasting, I can't talk anymore. That's kind of been the battle cry of this show and our particular, sites, is that you cannot like Stanton and understand that he is the backup for 2017. Gabbert's in here to be evaluated to be the quarterback for 2018 and beyond potentially. Now Carson Palmer comes back, obviously everything changes, but they're not going to go away from Stanton for a guy that's had really just a month working in the system. I mean, I know he's been here since May, but a guy that's basically had a month working in the system, a guy that's got games under his belt in the system. That wasn't going to happen. And I don't know the reason why people thought it would happen. The conversation about salary and that, if you cut Stanton, you save all this money. That's a non-starter. One, they have $13 million in cap space. So who do they need to sign for $13 million? Like, there's not a player out there worth $13 million.
They need to sign Blaine Gabbert to that long extension now, essentially.
Right, basically. Like, they can do that. They can give him legitimately, like, if they saw enough, they could offer him 3 years and, $10 million. 3 years and probably $6 million, if we're being completely honest. But, they could give him long-term backup money, which is like $3 million a year. But people don't understand that. Like, that's the going rate for a qualified backup. Do you know how many passes Chase Daniel has thrown in his life in the NFL? 100. And he's been paid millions of dollars still. And it's not going to change because teams trust him. They trust what he's able to do on the board. They trust what he's able to do in the quarterback room in assisting whoever the starter is. He's an 8-year backup. 8 years, Chase Daniel. And he's thrown, I think it's 74 passes in his career.
Great life.
And he's made $24 million. So, like, are the Cardinals overpaying for Drew Stanton? Probably, but that's what these guys get paid. Chad Henne's the same thing. Career backups that understand the offense, that are strong in the coaching room, and they're invaluable to starting quarterbacks, quarterback coaches, and head coaches, especially if they're the offensive coordinator like Bruce Arians. So when you look at it, when it's all said and done, you can dislike it as much as you want, but 9-year veteran Chad Henne has been with the Jaguars since 2012. He's basically their Drew Stanton, and he's they've paid him close to just over $23 million, and he'll make another $3.5 million this year. It's the going rate. You can, and here's the other thing, and here's the last thing I'll say about this. Bruce Arians knows what he's going to get when he puts Drew Stanton out there. He's 6-3 as a starter for the Cardinals.
Second best winning percentage in team history, mind you.
Right, exactly. Consistent numbers. They're not good. They're not good at all. If they were good, they wouldn't have extended 2 years ago. They would have said, we'll give Drew Stanton the job. Especially coming off of the injury and everything, the Cardinals had an out. They could have walked away. They couldn't have, they could have not kicked the can down the road. But they've seen enough for Drew Stanton to know, okay, this is a guy that you want playing 1 to 2, maybe 3 games. This isn't a guy you want playing 16.
Right.
Bruce Arians trusts Drew Stanton in that role. He knows what he's getting. We don't know what we're getting out of Blaine Gabbert. We have no idea because he's literally had one period of success in his career over a long stretch, and it wasn't in a situation that could be the pressure cooker that is Arizona if something were to happen to Palmer for 2 to 3 games. So they're not going to get rid of Drew Stanton because they know who he is. They know what he's going to do for them. They know he'll keep them in games, and that they have a better than 50% chance to win those games.
Daniel Buchanan was taken off of the physically unable to perform list, the PUP. He's back. He's not going to practice yet. The goal is he's going to do walkthroughs this week and practice next week, and then he should be in line to play in week 1. This is good news as long as he's ready. And I think the impact will be immense. Now, there are some other players who are now injured. Carlos Dansby's got a leg issue. Mike Iupati has an arm issue, going to miss a few days. Kerwin Williams wasn't suited up today on Tuesday. And then the big one is Robert Kimdichie. He left the field on Tuesday, seemingly with a limp in his legs. Maybe it's an ankle, maybe it's a leg, maybe it's a foot. How bad could that be?
It's devastating. It's devastating because, as I talked about earlier, he's probably been the best defensive lineman they've had in camp and the preseason. But then it's also devastating if it is a high ankle sprain, if it's something that's going to leave him hobbled for 4 to 6 weeks, because the momentum is kind of dead, and now all of a sudden you're waiting, and maybe they can overcome his absence because he really hasn't been a guy that they had to count on at this point. But you know to see him play, and so it's a frustrating thing, and it's disheartening. But at the same time, I think you trust that he can come back from this, and he can kind of put it together, and be a guy that is able to be a contributor for this team.
Then the one other thing I want to talk about before we move on to the Atlanta game would be players helping and hurting themselves. Last week, we kind of put on blast the 2 offensive linemen the Cardinals drafted, Will Holden and Dorian Johnson. Dorian Johnson in particular, because he only had 4 snaps in the second game. He, in fact, when you look at the snap counts, when they brought in Dorian Johnson and Will Holden to play with the rest of the second team line, and they let Bergstrom and Wetzel out early to give them a look with the rest of the second team line. The performance wasn't, the fact that Dorian Johnson was playing, no one talked about him, no one talked about Holden, but it was enough for me at least to say, okay, Johnson, even though Bergstrom has been playing well, that I think Johnson for me now is back on that. Yeah, they're going to be on the roster. Well, Will Holden, I'm still not convinced, especially with as you noted, both John Wetzel, I think he's a lock, and Ulrich John have been playing really well. And so Holden has to beat out Ulrich John, and I don't think he's done it yet.
Yeah, and I mean, it's going to be disappointing if they cut their 4th and 5th round picks. I think both make it to the practice squad. I kind of talked about it last week, but it was good to see him play this last week. Wetzel's running first team left guard. Well, Toner and Wetzel are rotating at first team left guard with the Mike Iupati. What is it now? Knee injury, or was it elbow? I'm not trying to be rude.
Iupati's triceps.
Tricep. Okay. Yeah. So, it's always somewhere on him, and he's banged up. Like, that's just the reality of it. He's been in the NFL for a long time. He's played a very demanding position. He's going to be banged up. Anyways, Toner and Wetzel are rotating in at the left guard, first team left guard position. So those guys are locks. We've known that they're locks since about the second week of training camp, but those guys are locks. Ulrich John continues to play well. Will Holden's got a battle on his hands. And then the question becomes, do they keep 8 or 9? And if they do keep 9, who's the odd man out there? And at this point, I really don't know. I mean, Holden and Johnson it seems like both are going to get a chance to be guards. I know they've been playing Holden at left tackle a little bit, but it looks like they're both going to be more guards in the NFL. So who wins that position? Who deserves that opportunity, and who's going to kind of grab it and take it? I think this week will be interesting, but game 5, which is preseason week 4, is going to be really the telltale of that, because I think that'll be your extended look. And if Will Holden can't hold up in pass protection again, if he's struggling again, if Dorian Johnson is not a guy that's able to move people in the run game, maybe both get cut, maybe one outplays the other and they're able to keep one. It's just it's going to be a battle at this point.
I agree. I thought Jeremy Ross helped himself. I thought that if you're looking at, a guy I got my eye on was Carlton Agadosi, a guy that the team really likes. He didn't help himself by not playing. But overall, I mean, there wasn't a ton of negatives. There wasn't aside from Scooby with the first team looking out of place, there was really no one who I watched that I can recall now that really hurt themselves. Like I said, they really hurt their chances for the roster, other than guys not playing, because availability is going to be an issue. Aaron Dobson is a guy. It's interesting. If there's a possibility for, say, a J.J. Nelson not making the roster, Aaron Dobson, I think, would be the only guy that would replace Nelson. As Arians talked about, he was getting behind guys, so he's get the speed to do it. But Dobson's just barely practicing, and maybe he'll play this week. But for me, really, there was no one else that said that really hurt themselves, in my opinion, other than Drew Stanton, whose performance was very Drew Stanton-ish in terms of the preseason. Didn't look sharp, only got a few snaps in. But that told me when they did that he was their backup, that they didn't need him to play more to know what they were getting.
Yeah, and it was a strong. I think you are slightly concerned about the backup running back position. How many teams have 2 great running backs? That's a fair question to begin with, but
the Falcons.
Yeah, but I mean, how many teams have 2 great running backs when they have a workhorse? I guess we'll see what the Cowboys have, depending on the Zeke suspension. The Steelers did when they had D'Angelo Williams, but I think he's moved on now. But overall, usually there's a clear, downgrade. And unless they drafted Joe Mixon in the 2nd round, I don't think there was going to be anybody that could kind of be David Johnson if anything happened to David Johnson. But I think it's a slight disheartening. But again, I wonder how much of that was the offensive line. And Kerwin Williams didn't get any reps at running back, I believe.
No, he did not. He only got his return reps. He did not play at running back, and he wasn't suited up today on Tuesday at practice. And I know he suffered. There was an ankle thing that he dealt with after Oakland. Arians said he just wanted to focus on returns, but it could have been his ankle is bothering him just enough that he didn't want him playing running back, and
you wonder how much Logan getting injured has to do with that, because they've already lost the guy that was clearly the best option to be a return man on this roster.
Yeah.
And now they may be saying, look, you're going to return the football on kicks and punts, and sorry, buddy, that's your job. On one side,
especially
you're happy for Kerwin because he's finally going to make a roster coming out, but on the flip side, he, unfortunately for him, he doesn't get to show his ability at running back unless there's another litany of injuries. But I understand the Cardinals' perspective of this, and that we drafted a guy in the 5th round specifically for his return abilities, and now he's out. you're going to be on the roster specifically for your return abilities. We're not going to take a chance of you getting injured like he did. I get it. I do.
Some brands offer you low finance, or cashback, or servicing.
Renault don't do ors. We do ands. The Renault Kadjar with 1.91% APR and €1,000 cashback and 3 years servicing, saving you thousands. Renault, the brand with the ands. Visit your local Renault dealer. Finance is made under a hire purchase agreement. Terms and conditions apply. Deposit required subject to lending criteria. See Renault.ie.
And heading into this final, not the final, but the penultimate preseason game against the Atlanta Falcons, Cardinal starters are going to play. Other than David Johnson, David Johnson's probably going to be in there a few plays. He's had 9 snaps.
And Larry Fitzgerald.
And they won't throw to him either. Like I said, he doesn't need to be tackled, and if we throw to him, they'll probably tackle him, so we probably won't throw to him.
Well, and honestly, why even play those guys? Like, just put them in bubble wrap, sit them on the sideline, and.
Well, I like that, the thing with David Johnson is in 4 snaps against the Raiders, he had 3 carries, and in 5 snaps against the Bears, he had 3 carries. So he is getting his work in, and he's getting tackled, but save those tackles because we know he's going to get the ball a lot, and they're not going to want to take him out much during the regular season. So this is a way to get him work, but not waste those hits. So he's going to get tackled a lot during the year. You can control these right now. So I think they're doing it the right way. I like that. But I want to see more of this. I mean, in terms of the offense, ideally John Brown will play, but I'm not sure he's gonna. I don't know if there's any individuals I want to see. I just want to see the starters play well. I want to see the starters play well and to respond, and if there's some adversity, to bounce back. I've always got my eye on Justin. I always want to pay attention to Justin Bethel because he's the guy that, could be potentially the weak link in that defense once the season starts. And so that really, in terms of the stars, I want to see. What about you?
I want to see Robert Kimbiche on the field, but
that too.
Outside of him, I really want to see what Valdir and Humphreys have against a good pass rush in Atlanta. They have Vic Beasley, who's looked great. That's gonna give Valdir some problems on that side. And then Upati's gonna have his work cut out for him with their interior pass rusher and Grady Jarrett. So all of these things are going to get tested. That's going to be, important to see. I think the other thing for me that I'd like to see is the continued usage of Jermaine Gresham and Troy Nicholas, or if Fanny Moma, even Ricky Seals-Jones in the game. He had a 46-yard reception. Just the tight end, the evolution of the tight end usage for the Arizona Cardinals offense. I know a lot of their I'm trying to think of the correct word, but I know a lot of their hesitation to involve the tight end more had been due to lack of talent. I mean, hell, Jim Dre was one of the statistical tight ends you've had under Bruce Arians. But
you remember Rob Hausler had his best year, his first year with the Cardinals,
right? And that's the best statistical year from a tight end under Arians with the Cardinals. All that being said, it seems like Gresham. I shouldn't say that. We know Gresham's better than Rob Hausler. Troy Nicholas should be better than Rob Hausler, and knock on wood, he's remained healthy and he's caught a pass in every game. So he's taken hits, everything. Is kind of like the undrafted version of Troy Nicholas in that every time he every season he just ends up hurt, and so you never get to really see him perform. So I'd like to see the continued involvement and health of those guys, so we can see kind of the expansion of the offense even more. All of a sudden, instead of 3 receivers, and then last year 1 receiver and a running back, now all of a sudden you might have 2 receivers, clearly a running back, and maybe 1 or 2 tight ends, and I think that just gives Carson Palmer more toys to play with. Oh,
the other I forgot actually for part of me, and I didn't bring it up because I forgot. Rodney Gunter, he didn't play at all, a single snap. And he's not been mentioned. He's not been mentioned in the preseason. He's not been mentioned in training camp. What's happened to Rodney Gunter? And I left him off based on the fact he didn't play on Saturday. I left him off my final 53 because I wonder if that's what's happening, because Kimdichie and Olsen Pierre are getting all the praise. Xavier Williams gets mentioned. Rodney Gunter doesn't get any mention. And so Gunter was supposed to be good. I want to see him play, and I want him to make an impact, because it almost appears that he has flamed out, whether it's weight or something. I don't know. And no one's asking about him either.
Which is unfortunate. And, it's one of those unfortunate things because it's a reach based on the outcome, if that makes sense. And which is why I hate the draft and the term reach and value and all that stuff anyways. Because when he drafted, when Steve Keim picked him in 2014, and then he started as a rookie at nose tackle, or was it, 2015, sorry. And he started as a rookie nose tackle. Everybody loved Rodney Gunter. A great pick by Steve Keim, trading up in the 4th round to get a guy out of Division II. Brilliant. Steve Keim's a genius. They cut him before the end of his contract. That's a bad pick, and that was a bad trade, and that was a bad move up. And that's why the draft grades and evaluations and things like that. I mean, you can have one good season and everything looks hunky-dory, and all of a sudden your career is, kind of in the toilet, and then those picks all of a sudden weren't as good as they were. So, we all thought initially, Rodney Gunter, who's this guy? I emailed my buddy Emery Hunt, who does a lot of coverage of small school guys, and he goes, "Hey, he's a good player. He's got a real good physicality and looked like the type of guy that should be outperforming all the guys he was playing against." Which then he got here and he performed well, and you saw that, and then his snaps reduced in year 2, and you're like, is learning a new position, losing that weight back, and getting back to being this kind of more explosive athlete. And then year 3, like you said, we're not hearing about him. We haven't heard anything. Maybe there's a lingering injury, which means he's in Bruce Arians' doghouse anyways. We don't know what it is. Somebody asked.
And that's why I want to see him play, because I want to see him. And one other player that I want to see, because now I've seen enough of Harlan Miller at safety to think, yeah, he could make this roster and be a contributor. Since Rudy Ford's been out, I want to see how he does. I need to see him play, because I think that last roster spot, I think they're going to keep 9 defensive backs, and it's going to come down to Harlan Miller or Rudy Ford or maybe Ironhead Gallen. And I've seen enough of Gallen. I've seen enough of Harlan Miller. I don't know what the Cardinals have in Rudy Ford.
And again, I mean, we're going back, man, it's going to look weird if the back half of that roster, or that back half of that draft, is all cut or on IR for this year. I mean, the IR you can't really do anything about, but it's frustrating and it's disappointing. And I don't think all 3 of those guys get cut, but it'll be something to watch. Yeah, because Ford had some buzz, didn't he? Like people were on the Ford train and thought that he could be a guy that won a position and kind of made the roster and was a special teams contributor, because he had size and speed that, just is uncommon at the position. And now it's like,
yeah. But I think that's
injuries will kill you on this team, though, man. Like, that's something we've talked about before. Like, you get injured and you're forgotten.
And if you've got talent on a roster, it's an easy thing to do. But is there anyone else or anything else that you're wanting to watch other than this, that you're looking for, other than the stuff that we've already mentioned before? We want the starters to play well. We want to see specific players. Is there anything else left to do before we wrap things up tonight, Seth?
No, I'm happy here. I'm excited to watch this final preseason game, and then let some guys that will be doing other things in a couple of weeks play their last NFL game this year in week 5 while you enjoy the ASU opener.
That's right. So that'll wrap up this 163rd show of the Rise Up Sea Red podcast. You can find us all over. You can find us on Cards Wire, on my site featured there, on revengeofthebirds.com, on Blog Talk Radio, on Audio Boom, on Stitcher Radio, iTunes, on TuneIn Radio, on Facebook at Rise Up Sea Red, on Twitter at Rise Up Sea Red. That's Seth Cox. I'm Jess Root. We'll be back again next week. Go Cardinals and Rise Up Sea Red.